Alright, let's be real for a second. You think you know Stray Kids? You've watched every MV, every SKZ Code episode, every fan meeting clip on loop, and you're sitting there confident like, yeah, I know these guys. But here's the thing. What if I told you that the hobbies they do when the cameras aren't rolling, when the stage lights go dark and the choreography shoes come off, actually reveal a completely different layer of who they really are? We're not talking about the usual, oh, they like playing games, kind of surface level stuff. No, we're going way deeper than that. Did you know one member has a hobby so meditative it's practically monk-level discipline? Or that another member's secret obsession connects to a skill most people wouldn't even associate with an idol? What about the one whose hobby literally shaped the emotional DNA of Stray Kids music without most fans even realizing it? And here's a wild one. One of them has a hobby that's so unexpectedly wholesome, it completely flips the tough image fans have built around him. 8 members, 8 hobbies, 8 revelations that will make you rethink everything you thought you knew. This isn't just a list. This is a personality deep dive disguised as entertainment. So buckle up, because we're counting down from number 8 all the way to number 1, and trust me, the deeper we go, the more shocking it gets. Ready? Let's get into it. Number 8. Hyunjin. The idol who paints his soul onto canvas. You look at Hyunjin on stage, and what do you see? A performer who moves like liquid fire, whose facial expressions alone could tell 1,000 stories, whose dance lines are so sharp they could cut through silence like a blade. He's the visual center of Stray Kids, the member whose ethereal face has launched 1 million fan edits, and the guy whose stage presence is so magnetic it borders on hypnotic. But here's what most casual fans completely miss. When Hyunjin walks off that stage, when the sweat dries and the adrenaline fades, he doesn't reach for his phone to scroll social media or collapse on the couch to binge-watch dramas. No, Hyunjin picks up a paintbrush. And what happens next is something that fundamentally changes the way you understand this man. Hyunjin is a serious, dedicated, deeply passionate visual artist, and we're not talking about cute little doodles in the margins of a notebook. We're talking full-scale acrylic paintings, abstract compositions, emotionally charged portraits, and mixed media works that have genuinely impressed professional artists and art critics who had zero idea they were looking at work created by a K-pop idol. This isn't a side hobby he picked up for content. This is something that lives in his bones. Hyunjin has been drawing since he was a child, long before he ever dreamed of becoming an idol, long before JYP Entertainment ever scouted him. Art was his first language, before dance, before performance, before the camera learned his name. And if you trace the timeline of his artistic journey, you start to realize something profound. The same emotional intelligence that makes him one of the most captivating performers in 4th-generation K-pop is the exact same emotional intelligence that fuels his paintings. They come from the same well. During Stray Kids' earlier years, Hyunjin would often stay up late in the dorm, quietly painting while the other members slept. He once mentioned in a V-Live that painting is the only time his mind truly goes quiet, and if you know anything about Hyunjin's personality, you know that's a massive statement. This is a guy who feels everything at 100% intensity. Joy, sadness, frustration, love. He doesn't experience emotions at a moderate volume. Everything hits him like a tidal wave. And painting became his way of processing that. It became his emotional anchor. Art therapists have long documented the psychological benefits of visual art as a form of emotional regulation, and Hyunjin stumbled into that truth instinctively, without anyone teaching him. He paints when he's overwhelmed. He paints when he's inspired. He paints when he can't find the words to express what's sitting heavy in his chest. And the results? They're genuinely stunning. His artwork has been shared on Stray Kids' official social media channels multiple times, and each time, fans and non-fans alike are left stunned by the depth and maturity of his compositions. He gravitates toward abstract expressionism, bold colors, aggressive brushstrokes, emotional textures that feel almost violent in their honesty. One of his most talked about pieces featured deep reds and blacks bleeding into each other, and fans who analyzed it noticed that it was created during a period when Hyunjin was going through significant personal reflection. The painting didn't just look emotional, it was emotional. It carried weight. It told a story that words would have fumbled. And here's where it gets even more interesting from a psychological standpoint. Studies in creative cognition have shown that individuals who engage in both performing arts and visual arts tend to develop a heightened capacity for empathy, emotional nuance, and self-awareness. Hyunjin is a living case study of this phenomenon. His ability to embody different characters on stage, to shift between vulnerability and power in a single breath during performances like Red Lights, or his contemporary dance solos, that doesn't just come from dance training. That comes from a mind that has been trained through painting to observe the world in layers, to see beyond the surface, to understand that every emotion has texture and color and depth. Fellow members have spoken about this too. Bang Chan once mentioned in a live broadcast that Hyunjin's sensitivity is one of the group's greatest strengths, and that his artistic nature brings a dimension to Stray Kids that no one else could replicate. Lee No, who is known for his more reserved and practical personality, has expressed quiet admiration for Hyunjin's ability to pour himself into art without holding back, something Lee No himself admits he finds difficult to do outside of dance. The contrast is striking, and it tells you everything about why Hyunjin's hobby matters. It's not just paint on canvas. It's a window into the most unguarded version of himself. In the high-pressure world of K-pop, where every move is calculated and every public appearance is curated, Hyunjin's paintings are the one space where no filter exists. No choreography. No camera angles. No styling team. Just raw, uncut emotion translated into visual form. And perhaps the most beautiful part of the story is that Hyunjin has never tried to commercialize his art or turn it into a personal brand. He paints because he needs to, not because it generates content. He shares his work when he feels like it, not on a marketing schedule. In an industry that commodifies every aspect of an idol's life, Hyunjin's art remains stubbornly, beautifully personal. It belongs to him first, and to the world second. That's rare. That's real. And that's why this hobby doesn't just reveal a hidden talent. It reveals the actual core of who Hwang Hyunjin is beneath the stage lights and the screaming crowds. He's an artist in every sense of the word, and the paintbrush might actually be more honest than the spotlight ever could be. But if you think a painter is the most surprising hobby on this list, wait until you hear what the next member does in their downtime, because it involves a level of patience and precision that would make even the most disciplined minds do a double take. Number 7. Lee No, the cold-blooded savage who secretly nurtures everyone through cooking. Here's the thing about Lee Miho, better known as Lee No, that throws people off every single time. On variety shows, in interviews, during behind-the-scenes content, this man radiates an energy that can only be described as beautifully unhinged. He's the member who delivers savage one-liners without blinking, the one who roasts his group mates so effortlessly that you'd think emotional detachment was his superpower. And the guy whose resting facial expression looks like he's silently judging every life decision you've ever made. Fans call him the cat-like member, and honestly, that comparison is almost too accurate, independent, unpredictable, affectionate on his own terms, and utterly impossible to read. So when you hear that Lee knows go to hobby when he's not performing, rehearsing, or terrorizing his members with deadpan humor is cooking, not just cooking, but genuinely dedicated, recipe researching, technique obsessed, feed everyone in the room cooking, it hits different. It hits like a plot twist in a movie you thought you had figured out. Because cooking, at its core, is an act of care. It's one of the most intimate, nurturing things a human being can do for another person. You're not just combining ingredients. You're saying, without words, I thought about you. I spent time for you. I want you to feel good. And that's exactly what Lee No does, over and over again, quietly, without fanfare, without asking for recognition. The members of Stray Kids have confirmed this countless times across various content. Lee No is the one who cooks in the dorm. Not occasionally. Regularly. He's the member who will wake up earlier than everyone else, walk into the kitchen, and start preparing a proper meal before the rest of the group has even opened their eyes. Bang Chan, who is notorious for his late-night work sessions in the studio, has mentioned multiple times that he's come back to the dorm exhausted and found food that Lee No left for him, wrapped up and waiting. Han Jae-sung, who shares a notoriously chaotic dynamic with Lee No that swings between roasting each other to near destruction and moments of surprising tenderness, once said on a fan call that Lee No's cooking makes him feel at home. And that statement carries more weight than it might seem on the surface, especially when you consider that these young men have been living away from their families since their trainee years, grinding through a system that often strips away the comforts of a normal adolescence. Lee No's cooking fills that gap. It rebuilds something that the idol industry takes away. And the level of his culinary skill isn't amateur hour either. This isn't a guy who throws ramen in boiling water and calls it a day. Lee No watches cooking tutorials with the same focus other people reserve for studying for exams. He researches recipes from different cuisines. He experiments with flavor combinations. He's been seen on V-Lives preparing dishes that require actual technique, braised meats, handmade pasta sauces, elaborate Korean stews that take hours of slow simmering to get right. During one memorable episode of SKZ Code, when the members were tasked with cooking challenges, Lee No moved through the kitchen with a calm, practiced confidence that immediately separated him from the controlled chaos happening around everyone else. He didn't panic. He didn't guess. He knew what he was doing, and the final dish reflected that. The other members weren't just impressed, they were genuinely grateful. And that moment captured something essential about who Lee No really is beneath the savage persona. Psychologically, there's a fascinating concept called acts of service as a love language, popularized by Dr. Gary Chapman's research on interpersonal relationships. For people whose primary love language is acts of service, expressing affection through words feels awkward, forced, even performatively dishonest. Instead, they show love through doing, through action, through effort, through quietly making someone's day better without announcing it. Lee No is a textbook case of this. He is famously uncomfortable with overt emotional expression. He deflects compliments with humor. He dodges sentimental moments by cracking jokes or delivering a perfectly timed insult that sends everyone laughing. But then he goes home and cooks a 3-course meal for his members. The dissonance between his public persona and his private actions isn't a contradiction, it's a revelation. It tells you that Lee No's love is not loud, but it is constant. It doesn't perform for cameras, but it shows up in the kitchen at 7 in the morning. And here's a detail that makes this even more layered. Lee No has 3 cats at home named Sunny, Doonji, and Dory, and the way he talks about feeding them, caring for them, making sure their meals are balanced and their environment is comfortable mirrors exactly how he approaches cooking for his members. There's a consistency of character here that goes beyond surface-level observation. Whether it's cats or bandmates, Lee No's instinct is the same. Take care of them, feed them, make sure they're okay, and don't make a big deal about it. It's a quiet heroism that doesn't seek applause, and in an industry that rewards loudness, spectacle, and constant self-promotion, there's something deeply refreshing about a person whose most meaningful expressions of love happen in a kitchen, away from any spotlight. Food anthropologists have long argued that cooking is one of humanity's oldest forms of social bonding. It predates language, predates organized religion, predates every institution we've ever built. When Lee No cooks for stray kids, he's tapping into something ancient and primal. He's reinforcing the bond that holds this group together not through grand speeches or emotional declarations, but through the simplest, most fundamental human gesture. Here, I made this for you. Eat well. It's the kind of hobby that doesn't make headlines, doesn't trend on Twitter, doesn't generate viral fancam moments. But it's the kind of hobby that holds a group of 8 young men together through the brutal pressures of an industry designed to break people apart. And if that doesn't completely reshape the way you see this savage member of Stray Kids, nothing will. Now, if you thought cooking was an unexpected twist for someone with Lee No's personality, the next member's hobby operates in a completely different dimension, one that involves rhythm, solitude, and a creative process so personal that even the other members rarely get to witness it in full. Number 6. Felix. The deep-voiced powerhouse whose hands were made for baking, not just dancing. Close your eyes and listen to Felix's voice. That impossibly deep, rumbling bass that sounds like it was borrowed from a movie trailer narrator or a late-night jazz radio host. A voice so low it literally went viral the moment the internet first heard it. Now picture that same voice humming softly in a kitchen at 2 a.m, flour dusted across his cheeks, an apron tied around his waist. Carefully piping buttercream frosting onto a birthday cake, he spent 4 hours perfecting for a staff member he barely knows personally, but wanted to make feel special anyway. That mental image? That contradiction between the thunderous stage presence and the flour-covered sweetheart? That's Felix. That's the real Leo Bach. And his hobby, baking, isn't just a cute side note in his idol profile. It's arguably the single most revealing window into understanding why this particular human being radiates the kind of warmth that makes everyone around him feel like they matter. Let's get one thing straight before we go deeper. Felix doesn't bake casually. He doesn't toss pre-made cookie dough onto a sheet pan and call it a personality trait. This man bakes with intention, with research, with the kind of meticulous precision that would make pastry school instructors nod in approval. He's made layered cakes with complex flavor profiles. He's attempted macarons, and if you know anything about baking, you know that macarons are the final boss of pastry, the recipe that breaks professional bakers and reduces culinary students to tears. The temperamental meringue, the exact oven temperature, the aging of the almond flour, the humidity sensitivity, it's a nightmare wrapped in a pastel shell. And Felix tackles it willingly, joyfully, treating every failed batch not as a frustration, but as a lesson. That mindset alone tells you something critical about his character. This is a person who finds peace in the process, not just the result. And that philosophy extends far beyond the kitchen. Think about Felix's journey into Stray Kids, and suddenly the baking makes perfect sense in a way that's almost poetic. Here's a kid who was born in Sydney, Australia, who grew up speaking English as his primary language, who was plucked out of his comfortable life and dropped into the ultra-competitive Korean trainee system where he barely spoke the language, barely understood the culture, and was surrounded by trainees who had years of head start on him in every measurable skill. The isolation he experienced during those early months has been well documented. Felix has spoken openly about crying himself to sleep, about feeling like an outsider, about the crushing weight of wondering whether he'd made the biggest mistake of his life by leaving everything familiar behind. He was even temporarily eliminated from the survival show that formed Stray Kids, a moment so devastating that it still brings tears to fans who rewatch it years later. And during those dark, uncertain periods, what did Felix turn to? Baking. He baked in the dorm kitchen during his trainee days when homesickness hit hardest. He baked recipes his mother used to make back in Australia, lamingtons, simple butter cakes, the kind of comfort food that carries the emotional DNA of home in every bite. Baking became his bridge between two worlds. It was the one activity where language didn't matter, where cultural barriers dissolved, where the only thing that mattered was whether the cake rose properly and whether the person eating it smiled. Food psychologists have extensively studied the phenomenon of comfort baking, the act of baking as emotional self-regulation, and the research consistently shows that the repetitive, tactile nature of baking, measuring, mixing, kneading, decorating, activates the same neural pathways associated with mindfulness meditation. It grounds you in the present moment. It pulls you out of anxiety spirals and anchors you to something tangible, something you can see and touch and share. For a young man navigating the emotional minefield of being a foreign trainee in an unforgiving industry, baking wasn't just a hobby, it was survival. It was therapy disguised as dessert. And here's where the story gets even more beautiful. Felix doesn't bake for himself. Almost never. If you track every single instance of Felix baking that's been documented across V Lives, behind-the-scenes content, member testimonials, and fan interactions, a stunning pattern emerges. He bakes for other people. Always. He bakes cakes for the members' birthdays with personalized decorations that reference inside jokes only the group would understand. He bakes cookies and brownies for the staff, not the high-profile managers or producers, but the behind-the-scenes crew, the lighting technicians, the costume assistants, the people who work 14-hour days and never get publicly thanked. He's brought baked goods to fan signing events, personally packaging treats for stays with handwritten notes attached. The act of baking, for Felix, has never been about showcasing a skill or building a personal brand around a baking idol image. It's about making people feel seen. It's about translating an emotion he sometimes struggles to articulate, especially across the language divide that still exists in his daily life, into something universally understood. A warm cookie doesn't need translation. A slice of homemade cake doesn't require subtitles. And in that simplicity lies something extraordinarily profound about Felix's emotional intelligence. Changbin once said during a group interview that Felix's baking has a way of changing the atmosphere in the dorm entirely, that on stressful days, when comeback preparations are grinding everyone down and tensions are running high, the smell of something sweet coming from the kitchen immediately softens the room. People relax. People smile. People remember that they're not just coworkers trapped in a high-pressure machine, they're a family. And Felix creates that shift not through words, not through grand gestures, but through a tray of freshly baked brownies and a smile so genuine it could power a small city. What makes this even more remarkable is the contrast with his stage identity. On stage, Felix is a force of nature. His dance style is aggressive, sharp, full of controlled power. His rap delivery hits with the weight of his baritone voice like a freight train. He commands attention with an intensity that borders on intimidating. But offstage, in the kitchen, covered in flour with a spatula in hand, he becomes the softest version of himself, patient, careful, generous, quietly happy in a way that doesn't demand anyone's attention, but somehow captures everyone's heart anyway. That duality isn't a performance. It's the full spectrum of a human being who contains multitudes, who refuses to be boxed into a single identity, and whose hobby reveals that the deepest truth about Lee Yo-bak has nothing to do with how deep his voice is or how hard he dances. It has everything to do with how deeply he cares, silently, consistently, one baked good at a time. And if a member who bakes love into existence already has you emotionally compromised, brace yourself, because the next name on this list carries a hobby so unexpectedly cerebral, so quietly intense, that it reframes everything you thought you knew about what idols do when the world isn't watching. Number 5. I.N. The baby of the group who finds himself through the strings of a guitar. Every group has a magne, and every magne carries a burden that nobody talks about enough. You're the youngest. You're the one who got babed from day one. You're the one the fans coo over, the one the older members protect, the one whose identity gets permanently stamped with words like cute and adorable and precious before you ever get the chance to define yourself on your own terms. And in Stray Kids, a group known for self-production, lyrical depth, and a level of creative autonomy that's practically unheard of in the idol industry. Being the magne who doesn't produce beats or write title tracks could easily become a quiet insecurity that eats at you from the inside. Young Hyunjin, known to the world as I.N, lived inside that tension for years. And the hobby that pulled him out of it, that gave him a voice beyond the one JYP Entertainment trained, that transformed him from the cute youngest member into something far more complex and self-determined, learning guitar. On his own. Without a formal teacher. Without a curriculum. Without anyone asking him to do it. Let that sink in for a moment, because the weight of that decision reveals more about I.N's character than 100 variety show appearances ever could. In a group where Bang Chan produces tracks at 3 in the morning, where Changbin and Han write lyrics with the speed and precision of seasoned poets, where Hyunjin channels emotion through visual art and Lee No commands respect through quiet acts of care. The pressure on the youngest member to find his own creative lane is immense, even if nobody says it out loud. And I.N didn't respond to that pressure by copying what his Hyungs were doing. He didn't beg for studio time or force himself into the production process before he was ready. Instead, He did something far more courageous. He picked up an instrument that has nothing to do with the group's signature sound and started learning it from scratch, in private, on his own schedule, with no audience and no expectation of applause. The first time fans caught glimpses of I.N with a guitar, most people treated it as a cute moment, the magne strumming a few chords, how adorable, how wholesome. But then the covers started appearing. And they weren't beginner-level fumbling. They were clean. They were musical. They carried a sensitivity and a tonal awareness that you can't fake, the kind of playing that only comes from hours and hours of solitary practice. From callous fingertips and aching wrists and the quiet frustration of a chord transition that just won't cooperate until the 200th attempt. I.N wasn't performing guitar for content. He was becoming a guitarist. There's a massive difference, and anyone who's ever seriously studied an instrument knows exactly what that difference feels like. Learning guitar as a self-taught player is one of the most humbling experiences a person can go through. Unlike dance, where you have mirrors and instructors and group energy to push you forward, guitar is solitary. It's you, the strings, and the relentless honesty of a sound that tells you immediately whether you're doing it right or wrong. There's no faking it. There's no charm or facial expression that can compensate for a poorly fretted chord. The instrument demands discipline, patience, and a tolerance for failure that most people simply don't have. And I.N, the member who spent the first several years of his career being shielded and softened by the Magne label, chose that instrument deliberately. He chose the hard, lonely, unglamorous path of learning something from zero with no shortcut and no safety net. Music education researchers have long noted that self-taught musicians tend to develop a deeper emotional connection to their instrument precisely because there's no external structure guiding them. Every breakthrough is personal. Every milestone is self-validated. The relationship between player and instrument becomes almost intimate. It's a dialogue that happens in private, shaped entirely by the individual's emotional state, curiosity, and willingness to sit with discomfort. For I.N, the guitar became more than a hobby. It became proof, to himself, first and foremost, that he is more than what the industry labeled him. He's not just the visual. He's not just the sweet smile. He's not just the youngest member who exists to be protected. He's a musician who is building his own artistic identity, one chord at a time, outside the enormous shadow cast by the creative powerhouses in his own group. And the courage that takes? It's staggering when you really think about it. Imagine being surrounded every single day by some of the most prolific young creators in K-pop. 3racha literally writes and produces the music you perform, and instead of feeling paralyzed by comparison, you quietly go to your room, pick up a guitar, and start carving out your own space. That's not just a hobby. That's a declaration of selfhood. Seungmin, who shares vocal line responsibilities with I.N, once mentioned that hearing Hyunjin practice guitar in the dorm made him realize how much the magne had grown without anyone noticing. And that observation cuts right to the heart of who I.N is, a person whose growth happens quietly, almost invisibly, until one day you look up and realize the kid you were protecting has become someone who doesn't need protecting anymore. The guitar didn't change I.N's position in the group. He's still the beloved magne. He still gets teased. He still receives the affectionate coddling that comes with being the youngest in a tight-knit family of 8. But it changed how he sees himself, and that internal shift radiates outward in ways that are impossible to miss once you start paying attention. His confidence in recent years, in interviews, in performances, in the way he carries himself on stage, has a groundedness to it that wasn't there before. It's the quiet confidence of someone who has proven something to the only person whose opinion truly matters, himself. The guitar gave Hyunjin a room of his own in a house built by others, and he furnished it entirely with his own hands. And that's not adorable. That's not cute. That's deeply, profoundly admirable. But hold that admiration steady, because the next member's hidden hobby goes in a direction so wildly unexpected that it challenges everything you think you know about what intensity looks like when the stage lights go off. Number 4. Bang Chan, the leader who lifts iron to keep from breaking apart. Everybody sees Bang Chan as the man who has it all figured out. The unshakable leader. The guy who trained at JYP Entertainment for 7 brutal years, 7 years of watching other trainees debut while he stayed behind, 7 years of being told not yet, 7 years of swallowing rejection like daily vitamins, and still came out the other side with enough fire in his chest to build a group from the ground up and carry it on his shoulders to global stardom. He's the one who stays up until 4, 5, 6 in the morning producing tracks in the studio. He's the one who checks on every member's emotional state before checking his own. He's the one who cries during concerts not because of his own pain, but because he's overwhelmed by gratitude that the 7 people he fought to protect are still standing beside him. Christopher Bang is, by every measurable standard, the backbone of Stray Kids. So when you discover that his primary hobby outside of music isn't something relaxing, isn't something gentle, isn't some peaceful escape from the relentless grind, but rather an almost obsessive, punishingly intense commitment to physical fitness and weight training, your first reaction might be, well, that's not that surprising. A lot of idols work out. A lot of celebrities hit the gym. But here's where you'd be wrong to stop thinking, because Bang Chan's relationship with exercise isn't about aesthetics. It's not about building a six-pack for shirtless stage moments or bulking up for a concept photo. It's about survival. Psychological survival. And once you understand that, everything about this man rearranges itself in your mind like puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. Let's rewind to the context that most fans know intellectually but rarely sit with emotionally. Bang Chan left Australia at 13 years old. 13. An age when most kids are worried about school crushes and weekend plans, and this kid boarded a plane to a country where he didn't fluently speak the language, walked into one of the most cutthroat entertainment training systems on the planet, and began a journey that would test every fiber of his mental and emotional endurance. For 7 years, he watched peers debut. He watched friends leave the company. He experienced lineup changes, creative rejections, and the constant looming threat that maybe, after everything he'd sacrificed, it would all amount to nothing. The psychological toll of that experience is almost incomprehensible, and Bang Chan has been remarkably transparent about the scars it left. He's spoken on his late-night V-Live series, Chan's Room, about periods of deep self-doubt, about moments where the pressure felt physically crushing, about the loneliness of being the oldest trainee in rooms full of younger, fresher faces who hadn't yet learned what years of waiting does to a person's spirit. And it was during those darkest stretches that Bang Chan discovered something in the gym that he couldn't find anywhere else: control. That's the key word. Control. Because here's what nobody tells you about being a leader in K-pop: you control nothing. You don't control the company's decisions. You don't control comeback schedules. You don't control public perception, online narratives, chart performance, or the emotional well-being of 7 other human beings, no matter how desperately you try. The illusion of leadership is that you're steering the ship, but the reality is that you're standing at the helm of a vessel being tossed by waves you can't see coming, and the only thing anyone expects from you is to never, ever look scared. The gym strips all of that away. In the weight room, the equation is brutally simple. You either lift the weight or you don't. There's no ambiguity, no politics, no uncertainty. You set a target, you push your body to meet it, and the result is immediate, tangible, undeniable. For a man whose daily existence is defined by variables he can't control, that simplicity is not just appealing, it's medicinal. Exercise psychologists have extensively documented the relationship between high-intensity physical training and anxiety management, particularly in individuals who occupy high-responsibility roles. The mechanism is both chemical and psychological. Intense exercise floods the brain with endorphins and serotonin, while simultaneously providing a structured environment where effort directly correlates with outcome. For someone like Bang Chan, whose brain is wired to carry everyone else's weight before acknowledging his own, the gym becomes the one place where he is allowed to focus entirely on himself without guilt. He's not neglecting his members by doing bicep curls. He's not abandoning his production responsibilities by running on a treadmill. He's investing in the one resource that everything else depends on: his own mental and physical resilience. And the transformation has been visible over the years in ways that go far beyond physical appearance. Yes, Bang Chan's physique has changed dramatically. The lean trainee body has evolved into a genuinely muscular, powerful frame that fans have absolutely lost their minds over, and rightfully so. But the more important transformation is in how he carries himself. Watch early Stray Kids content, and then watch recent footage side by side. The difference isn't just muscle mass, it's presence. It's groundedness. It's the quiet, steady energy of a man who has found a method to process the enormous emotional weight he carries without collapsing under it. The members have noticed too. Changbin, who is himself a dedicated gym goer, has talked about working out with Chan and being struck by how different Chan is in that environment, quieter, more internal, almost meditative in his focus. It's not the performative, camera-ready Chan who hypes up the crowd or cracks jokes in interviews. It's a stripped-down, raw version of him that exists purely in the dialogue between his body and the weight in his hands. Han once mentioned that Chan's workout routine borders on extreme, early mornings, late sessions squeezed between studio work and schedules, a consistency that would intimidate professional athletes. And while Han said it with a mix of admiration and concern, the underlying truth is that Chan needs it. Not wants it. Needs it. The way some people need therapy, some people need journaling, some people need long walks in nature, Bang Chan needs the iron. It holds him together. It's the pressure valve that prevents the leader from imploding under the very leadership that defines him. And there's something heartbreakingly beautiful about that. The man who spends every waking moment making sure everyone else is okay has a hobby that is fundamentally, unapologetically about making sure he is okay. In a culture that glorifies self-sacrifice, especially for leaders, especially in K-pop, especially for someone who has publicly positioned himself as the group's emotional anchor, Bang Chan's gym habit is quietly revolutionary. It's him saying, without words, that he matters too. That his body matters. That his mental health matters. That the foundation cannot hold the building if nobody maintains the foundation. And every single rep, every single set, every single 5 a.m. session when the rest of the world is asleep, is Bang Chan maintaining himself so he can continue maintaining everyone else. If that doesn't redefine what strength really means, nothing on this planet ever will. But don't let the intensity of that revelation settle too comfortably, because the next member's hobby swings in a direction so dramatically different, so disarmingly gentle, that it will leave you questioning every assumption you've ever made about toughness and tenderness coexisting in the same person. Number 3. Han, the loudest voice in the room who writes his quietest truths in secret journals. If you've watched even 30 seconds of Stray Kids content featuring Han Jae-sung, you already have an image burned into your brain, a whirlwind of chaotic energy, a human exclamation mark who bounces off walls, screams at decibel levels that shouldn't be physically possible, makes faces that belong in a cartoon, and delivers comedic timing so sharp it could qualify as a professional skill. Han is the mood maker. He's the one who turns silent car rides into impromptu variety shows. He's the member who can make Lee No crack a smile against his will, who can pull a laugh out of Bang Chan at 4 in the morning when exhaustion should have killed every remaining serotonin molecule in the room. Fans adore his chaos. Compilations of his most unhinged moments rack up millions of views. He is, by every outward metric, the embodiment of extroverted energy, a supernova in human form that never seems to dim. So when you learn that Han Jae-sung, this exact same person, spends a significant portion of his private time sitting alone with a pen and a notebook, writing, not lyrics for Stray Kids, not rap verses for 3RACHA, but deeply personal journal entries. Reflections, stream of consciousness thoughts that no audience will ever see, something fundamental cracks in the image you thought you understood. And what spills out through that crack is the real Han Jae-sung, the one that the comedy and chaos are specifically designed to keep hidden. Here's what you need to understand about Jae-sung's relationship with writing to grasp why this hobby matters as much as it does. Yes, he's 1/3 of 3RACHA, Stray Kids' legendary production unit. Yes, he writes lyrics professionally. Yes, he's one of the most prolific songwriters in 4th-generation K-pop, with credits on an absurd number of tracks for someone his age. But there's a clear, deliberate line that Jisung draws between writing for work and writing for himself, and that line is where the real story begins. His personal journals aren't songs in development. They aren't drafts waiting to be polished and submitted to the team. They're raw, unedited conversations with himself, the kind of writing that exists purely because the person writing it needed to get something out of their head before it consumed them. And when you factor in what Jisung has publicly shared about his mental health, the significance of this habit multiplies exponentially. Han Jisung has been one of the most courageously transparent idols in the industry about his struggles with anxiety and panic disorder. He's spoken about experiencing panic attacks so severe that his body physically shut down. He's described periods where leaving the dorm felt impossible, where the gap between the performative confidence required on stage and the internal turmoil happening behind his ribcage was so vast it felt like living as two separate people. He took a temporary hiatus from activities to focus on his mental health, a decision that, in the relentless machinery of K-pop, required a level of bravery that most people will never have to summon. And throughout all of it, through the panic attacks, through the public scrutiny, through the pressure to maintain the funny guy image that fans had come to depend on, Jisung wrote. He didn't post about it. He didn't turn it into content. He sat in the quiet of his room and filled notebooks with the thoughts he couldn't say out loud, the fears he couldn't perform away, the questions about identity and purpose and worthiness that comedy could mask, but never answer. Expressive writing as a therapeutic practice has been studied extensively by psychologists like Dr. James Pennebaker, whose research at the University of Texas demonstrated that the act of writing about emotional experiences, particularly traumatic or anxiety-inducing ones, produces measurable improvements in both psychological and physical health. The mechanism isn't magic, it's cognitive processing. When you write about an overwhelming experience, you're forced to organize it into language, which means you're forced to create narrative structure around chaos. You transform a formless, suffocating cloud of emotion into something with edges, something you can look at from outside yourself, something that suddenly has a beginning and a middle and, crucially, the possibility of an end. Jisung stumbled into this therapeutic framework intuitively, the same way Hyunjin stumbled into art therapy through painting. No one prescribed it. No counselor handed him a journal and said, "Write your feelings." He found his way to the page because something in him understood that the noise in his head needed a place to land, and the notebook was safer than any stage, any camera, any conversation. And here's what breaks me about this. What genuinely makes my chest tighten when I think about it for too long, the duality of Han Jisung is not a persona switch. It's a survival mechanism. The loud, chaotic, endlessly entertaining version of Jisung that the world sees, that's real. That joy is genuine. That humor is organic. But it's also armor. It's the outward-facing layer that keeps people close enough to love him, but far enough from the parts that hurt. The journals are where the armor comes off. The journals are where Jisung doesn't have to be funny, doesn't have to be loud, doesn't have to be anything for anyone. He can be confused. He can be scared. He can be angry at himself or uncertain about his future or overwhelmed by the weight of being perceived by millions of people who think they know him because they've memorized his laugh. The pen doesn't judge. The page doesn't need him to perform. And in that freedom, in that radical privacy, Jisung accesses a version of himself that is quieter, deeper, and infinitely more complex than any variety show edit could ever capture. Changbin, his fellow 3RACHA member and the person who arguably knows Jisung's creative mind better than anyone outside of it, once hinted during a fan interaction that Jisung's personal writing is on a completely different emotional register than his professional work. That the things Jisung writes for himself carry a rawness that even their most vulnerable Stray Kids tracks only approximate. And that statement sits heavy when you consider tracks like Alien, Jisung's solo song that explored feeling fundamentally different from the world around him, or his contributions to songs like Gone Days and Streetlight, that drip with a melancholy so specific it feels autobiographical. If those songs are the filtered, polished versions of Jisung's inner world, imagine what the unfiltered pages look like. Imagine what truths live in those notebooks that will never become melodies, never become performances, never become anything other than proof that Han Ji-sung sat with his own darkness and chose to write his way through it instead of being swallowed by it. That's not a hobby. That's an act of radical self-preservation performed in silence by a person the world only knows how to see in full volume. And the contrast between who he is on camera and who he is on the page isn't a contradiction. It's the most complete portrait of a human being you could ever ask for, if you're willing to hold both truths at once without flinching. But if you think Ji-sung's hidden depth is the most startling revelation on this list, the next member is about to take you somewhere you truly did not see coming. A hobby so counterintuitive to their public image that it forces you to completely recalibrate your understanding of what intensity actually means when nobody's performing it. Number 2, Changbin, the most ferocious rapper in K-pop who hoards plushies like his life depends on it. Picture Changbin on stage. Go ahead, pull up any live performance in your mind: Thunderous, Myro, God's Menu. Take your pick. What do you see? You see a compact, muscular force of nature with veins bulging from his neck, delivering rap verses at a velocity that makes professional auctioneers sound sluggish, with a vocal tone so aggressive it could sandblast concrete. You see a performer whose facial expressions during hard-hitting tracks oscillate between "I will end you" and "I have already ended you, and I'm deciding whether to be merciful about it." Changbin on stage is intimidation personified. He's the member that fan editors overlay with fire effects and lightning bolts, and it doesn't even feel like an exaggeration. It feels like an understatement. His rap delivery in tracks like Domino and Cheese isn't just technically impressive, it's physically threatening. You feel it in your chest before your brain even processes the words. This is the idol that new fans see first and think, that guy definitely collects weapons or practices martial arts in his spare time. So when I tell you, with complete sincerity and mountains of documented evidence, that Changbin's most passionate, most dedicated, most emotionally significant hobby is collecting stuffed animals, plush toys, and cute character merchandise, and that his room at various points has resembled less a rapper's lair and more a pastel-colored sanctuary that a 5-year-old would design if given unlimited budget and zero adult supervision. I need you to sit with that information for a moment. Let it really settle. Because the gap between what you just pictured on stage and what actually exists in this man's private life is so enormous, so cosmically absurd, that it doesn't just surprise you. It forces a complete rewiring of how you understand the relationship between image and identity. Changbin doesn't casually own a few stuffed animals that someone gifted him. He actively, enthusiastically, almost compulsively collects them. He seeks them out. He gets excited about them in a way that is so purely, transparently joyful that it borders on infectious. Even members who would normally roast him for it find themselves disarmed by the genuineness of his happiness. He's been captured on camera hugging oversized plush toys with the kind of tenderness that makes you forget you're watching the same person who just screamed his lungs raw performing Backdoor 2 hours earlier. His collection of SKZO merchandise, the character line representing each Stray Kids member, is extensive and lovingly maintained. He doesn't just buy the items, he displays them, arranges them, talks about them with a warmth in his voice that is audibly different from how he discusses music or performance. It's softer, less guarded, more instinctive. It's the voice of someone who is completely comfortable in a space that the outside world would never associate with his public persona. And that comfort, that refusal to be embarrassed, that willingness to let the world see a dimension of himself that directly contradicts every tough rapper narrative built around him, that's where the real revelation lives. Psychologists who study persona construction and identity performance have a term for what Changbin does naturally: authentic role integration. Most people, when they occupy a high-intensity public role, whether it's a corporate executive, a military leader, or in this case, a rapper whose brand is built on aggression and dominance, begin to internalize that role until it bleeds into their private identity. They start believing their own performance. The tough guy stops being a stage character and becomes the only version of themselves they allow to exist, because vulnerability feels like a betrayal of the image they've built. It's a psychological trap that has destroyed countless artists, athletes, and public figures throughout history. Changbin sidesteps this trap entirely, and he does it through plush toys. That might sound ridiculous on the surface, but the underlying mechanism is profound. By maintaining a hobby that is the polar opposite of his professional persona, something soft, gentle, unapologetically adorable, Changbin preserves access to the parts of himself that the stage doesn't need, but the human being absolutely does. He's essentially telling his own psyche, every time he picks up a stuffed animal and smiles, "This is also me." The fierce rapper is real, but this is also real, and neither one cancels the other out. That's not just healthy, it's remarkably rare. Think about the pressure that exists specifically on male idols, and even more specifically on rappers, to maintain a consistent image of hardness. K-pop's rapper archetype is built on swagger, intensity, and emotional armoring. Showing softness, real, unperformative softness, is culturally risky. Fans can be cruel about it. Comment sections can be merciless. The entertainment industry itself reinforces the idea that rappers should be edgy, that their off-stage lives should mirror their on-stage intensity. And Changbin looks at all of that pressure, all of those expectations, all of those invisible rules about what a rapper is supposed to be when the microphone is off. And he responds by posting photos of himself cuddling a giant stuffed bear with a grin on his face that radiates 0% irony and 100% genuine happiness. The other members' reactions to this side of Changbin tell their own story. Bang Chan, who has known Changbin since their trainee days and has watched his evolution from nervous teenager to one of K-pop's most respected lyricists, has spoken with visible fondness about how Changbin's softness is actually his superpower. That the emotional range required to go from screaming on stage to gently arranging plush toys in his room is the same emotional range that makes his lyrics resonate so deeply. Because Changbin doesn't just write hard bars. He writes devastating emotional gut punches. His verse in Streetlight is one of the most emotionally naked pieces of rap in Stray Kids' discography. His contributions to introspective tracks reveal a writer who understands loneliness, longing, fear of inadequacy, and the ache of wanting to be enough, themes that don't come from a one-dimensional tough guy. They come from someone who has full access to every register of human emotion, someone who hasn't walled off their tenderness in pursuit of a harder image. The plushies are proof that those walls were never built. They're the physical evidence of a man who decided, consciously or unconsciously, that he would never sacrifice his wholeness for the sake of brand consistency. And there's something almost radical about watching Changbin exist in both spaces without apology, destroying stages with a ferocity that makes your adrenaline spike, and then retreating to a room filled with soft, comforting objects that represent the gentlest version of himself. He doesn't see a contradiction. He doesn't feel the need to explain or justify. He doesn't laugh it off self-deprecatingly the way many male public figures do when caught showing softness, turning vulnerability into a punchline before anyone else can. Changbin just is. He's the fierce rapper. He's the plushie collector. He's both, fully, simultaneously, without hierarchy or shame. And in a world that constantly pressures people, especially young men, especially public figures, especially artists in hyper-competitive industries, to choose a lane and stay in it. Changbin's quiet refusal to shrink himself to fit a single narrative is one of the most powerful statements any member of Stray Kids has ever made, and he makes it not with words or lyrics, but with a stuffed animal tucked under his arm and a smile that dares you to say something about it. Now, if the distance between Changbin's stage intensity and his private softness left your perception of idols fundamentally altered, the final member on this list, number 1, carries a hobby so quietly powerful, so unexpectedly layered, that it doesn't just close this countdown, it redefines everything this list has been building toward. Number 1, Seungmin, the perfectionist vocalist whose heart belongs to a baseball diamond. And here we are. Number 1. The top of the list. The revelation that every ranking before this has been quietly building toward. And if you expected the final spot to go to some dramatic, artistically intense hobby, maybe something dark, maybe something poetic, maybe something that screams tortured creative soul, Then Kim Seungmin is about to teach you the most important lesson this entire countdown has to offer, that the most surprising truths about a person are often hiding in the most ordinary-looking places. Because Seungmin's hobby, the one that consumes his free time, dominates his conversations when cameras aren't rolling, and reveals a version of himself that the polished, disciplined vocal powerhouse image barely hints at. Baseball. Not playing baseball professionally. Not training as a secret athlete on the side. Watching baseball. Following baseball. Living and breathing Korean baseball organization games with a devotion so intense, so encyclopedic, so emotionally volatile that it transforms the most composed member of Stray Kids into someone his own group mates barely recognize. Seungmin is a die-hard, ride or die fan of the Doosan Bears, and when I say die-hard, I mean the kind of fan who memorizes batting averages, tracks pitcher ERA fluctuations across seasons, debates lineup decisions with the conviction of a retired manager, and experiences the emotional arc of a 9-inning game as if his own career were on the line with every pitch. This is not casual sports viewership. This is obsession in its purest, most beautiful, most human form. And coming from Seungmin, the member whose entire public identity is built on control, precision, and methodical excellence, it is absolutely, stunningly revelatory. Let's establish who Seungmin is in the context of Stray Kids to understand why this matters so much. Seungmin is the member that vocal coaches point to as an example of technique done right. His singing is clean, controlled, pitch-perfect, and delivered with a consistency that is almost mechanical in its reliability. While other members bring raw emotion, experimental textures, and improvisational energy to their vocal performances, Seungmin brings architecture. He brings structure. Every note is intentional. Every breath is calculated. Every vocal run is practiced to the point where it sounds effortless, which is the greatest illusion in music because effortlessness is the product of relentless, painstaking effort. Off stage, this precision extends to his personality. Seungmin is organized. He's punctual. He's the member who remembers schedules, who keeps things tidy, who approaches life with a systematic orderliness that the more chaotic members simultaneously admire and find slightly terrifying. He's been affectionately nicknamed the textbook idol by fans because everything about him seems to follow a rulebook that only he has access to. And then you put a baseball game on television, and the textbook catches fire. The other members have described this transformation with a mixture of amusement and genuine awe. Han has recounted moments where Seungmin, who normally speaks in measured, thoughtful sentences, completely loses his composure during close games, yelling at the screen, groaning at bad calls, jumping off the couch when the Doosan Bears score a crucial run. Felix once mentioned that the loudest he's ever heard Seungmin's voice outside of singing wasn't during a concert or a heated group discussion. It was during a 9th-inning comeback that had Seungmin screaming at a volume and emotional register that felt like it belonged to a completely different person. Bang Chan, with his characteristic leader's affection, has said that watching Seungmin watch baseball is one of his favorite things in the world because it's the one context where the most controlled member of the group becomes utterly, helplessly, magnificently uncontrolled. And that's the key. That's the entire point. That's why this hobby sits at number 1. Because what baseball gives Seungmin is permission to be messy, to be loud, to be emotionally reckless, to care about something so deeply that dignity becomes irrelevant. In every other area of his life, Seungmin operates within self-imposed boundaries of excellence. His singing must be precise. His behavior must be exemplary. His contribution to the group must be reliable and consistent. These aren't external pressures, they're internal standards that Seungmin holds himself to with a rigor that, while admirable, carries an inherent cost. Perfectionism, as psychologists have documented extensively, is a double-edged trait. It produces extraordinary results, but it also creates a cage. And there it is. 8 members. 8 hobbies. 8 windows into the souls of people that millions of fans think they already know. But let's take a step back now and look at the full picture, because when you line these revelations up side by side, something extraordinary emerges, a pattern that goes far beyond individual quirks and personal interests. What you're really looking at is a complete emotional ecosystem. Hyunjin at number 8, pouring his overwhelming emotions onto canvas, proving that performance and visual art flow from the same well of sensitivity. Lino at number 7, quietly feeding the people he loves because his heart speaks through action, not words. Felix at number 6, baking bridges between two cultures and two identities, turning flour and sugar into a universal language of care. I.N at number 5, picking up a guitar and teaching himself independence, refusing to let the Magne label become the ceiling of his potential. Bangchan at number 4, lifting iron not for vanity but for sanity, maintaining himself so he can maintain everyone else. Han at number 3, filling secret notebooks with the truths his comedy keeps hidden, writing his way through the darkness with a pen that never judges. Changbin at number 2, clutching plush toys with the same hands that deliver some of K-pop's most aggressive rap verses, proving that toughness and tenderness aren't opposites, they're partners. And Seungmin at number 1, screaming at a baseball game with the same voice that delivers pitch-perfect vocals, finding emotional freedom in the one arena where perfection isn't required. Do you see it now? Do you see what connects all 8? Every single hobby on this list serves the same fundamental purpose. It gives each member access to a part of themselves that the idol industry doesn't make room for. Painting gives Hyunjin permission to feel without performing. Cooking gives Lee no permission to love without speaking. Baking gives Felix permission to belong without explaining. Guitar gives I.N permission to grow without comparison. Fitness gives Bangchan permission to prioritize himself. Journaling gives Han permission to be honest without an audience. Plushies give Changbin permission to be soft without apology. And baseball gives Seungmin permission to lose control without consequence. These aren't just hobbies. These are survival strategies. These are the quiet, private rebellions of 8 young men living inside a system that demands they be products, reminding themselves, through paint, through food, through music, through words, through softness, through sweat, through sport, that they are still, above all else, human beings. And maybe that's the real reason Stray Kids resonates the way they do. Not just because of the music, not just because of the performances, not just because of the content or the fan service or the relentless work ethic. But because somewhere underneath all of it, you can feel that these are people who have figured out how to stay whole in an industry designed to break them into marketable pieces. Their hobbies aren't footnotes in their idol profiles. They're the chapters that explain everything else. So the next time you watch Stray Kids perform, the next time you see them light up a stage with the kind of energy that makes 60,000 people lose their minds simultaneously, remember this list. Remember that the hands gripping that microphone also hold paintbrushes, spatulas, guitar picks, pens, dumbbells, stuffed animals, and baseball scorecards. Remember that the full story of a person is never told on a stage. It's told in the quiet moments, in the hobbies, in the spaces where nobody's watching. And in those spaces, Stray Kids aren't just idols. They're 8 complete, contradictory, beautiful, messy, extraordinary human beings, and that's worth more than any trophy, any chart position, or any sold-out arena could ever measure. This has been Surprising Hobbies of Stray Kids members that reveal their real personalities. Thank you for staying until the very end. And if this changed how you see even one member, then this list did exactly what it was supposed to do.